I want to start by just acknowledging some good news. There's a report coming out with Grad Nation this month that says over the last decade, with a lot of focus and energy, we've actually moved high school graduation rates almost 10 percentage points. And that's largely fueled by gains in African American and Latino students, which is terrific news. But we have a long way to go because there are a lot of groups that are trailing dramatically. Low-income kids, students with disabilities, students growing up in large urban markets are all somewhere between 15 to 30% below the national average. And so it's critical, as Seth said, that the goal line is really college completion. But we also have to recognize, as Kevin said, the fierce urgency of now, that there really is a very limited future if you're a high school dropout, right? This economy is absolutely brutal. So we have a long way to go, and at the same time, the goal line's shifting. What's required in the 21st century is only getting harder. So we can't keep thinking of just how we close the gaps we've been focused on for the last 15 to 20 years. In fact, what we have to do is we have to think about not gap closing strategies, but really leapfrog strategies that can move kids all the way into the 21st century to be competitive with their global peers. And to do that, we're going to need to think differently. And I would suggest that there's one fundamental concept that we should use as our magnetic north, and that is that young people are not problems to be solved, but they are potential to be fulfilled. So what does the evidence show us about how kids learn and what they need? I want to acknowledge and support that we need to continue all the adult-centered reforms that people are working so hard to put in place. And we need to build on top of those. But I want to spend some time talking about kid-centered reforms and a strategy to help them meet their potential. So first, I want to just review a couple facts about the brain, because there's a lot we can learn from both the field of neuroscience and youth development. So 5 facts about kids' brains. First of all, everything is interwoven. The thinking, feeling, organizing function of the frontal lobe, it's all connected. It's in the wiring. The idea that you can separate an approach for cognitive and non-cognitive development is ridiculous. It's just not the facts. 2, there's no such thing as an average learner. Our education system was built that there was an average learner, and we would focus on that, and then we'd help kids on the margins with some additional support. But it's really clear from the field of neuroscience that there's huge variability in how kids learn. 3, stress impacts brain development. It's crystal clear. The evidence is in, right? The stress impacts of poverty are internalized as a trauma. It releases cortisone, which attacks the brain and literally stunts the development. It impacts things like working memory, your executive function, ability to regulate emotions. The good news is positive interpersonal experiences support brain development. They literally buffer against the stress impacts on the brain. And then finally, brains are malleable, at least into their 20s and probably longer. So what that means is environment matters. Environments can either optimize the development of a child's brain or they can hurt it. From the field of youth development, I think it's really important that we stop and think that it's not just knowledge, it's also identity formation that's going to be key to helping kids achieve success in the 21st century. So the developmental framework says that adolescents are really pursuing the answers to 4 questions. Who do I want to be? What does this matter in a school setting? Well, that's cognitive relevance, right? If a student doesn't have a picture of where they want to go, then how can what they're learning in school be relevant to them? Where do I belong? That's about peer relationships, right? And the peer influence. What difference do I make and do I matter, right? This is about, is there a return on effort, right? Can I have control in my world? And then finally, how do I get what I want, right? That's executive functioning. That's pulling it all together. And developmental researchers will tell us that if you organize a school to help students answer those questions, that in fact what's going to happen is you're going to create an academic identity. Let me take that back. The student will create an academic identity that's intrinsic, sticky, and portable. And when you think about that, the college completion challenge of students graduating from high school, going into college, I can tell you right now that if we don't figure out a way to help students really build that academic identity that's portable, that isn't only going to work in a really reinforced cultural cocoon, that will really be part of who they are, it's going to be very hard for them to succeed with what they need to do to complete college in the 21st century. So it's clear the problem we're trying to solve is there's a gap between what schools are designed to do and what kids need. And that means that we have to transform and redesign schools, which is important for all kids. It's absolutely critical for kids in our lowest performing schools. And that is why one of the next bounces of the ball is the need to create a fortified teaching and learning environment. And what does this mean? It means that we actually have to design schools in a deliberate way to protect kids from the stress impacts of poverty. There's a group of practitioners, researchers, policymakers that are coming together to advocate for the idea that a new pillar of ed reform should be fortified teaching and learning environments. And it's rooted in the concept that kids growing up in concentrated generational poverty, or any students that are facing significant stress impacts that can impact the development of their brain and their ability to meet their potential, that they're going to need more than a good lesson every day. So it means, first and foremost, schools have to have great teachers and great leaders and rigorous instruction, but they also have to very deliberately work to reduce stress, create caring, bonding relationships, and teach critical social emotional learning skills that kids are going to need to succeed. In conclusion, though, there's one other thing we have to think about. The scale and intensity of the challenge is significant. We all know that the most important lever in education is great teachers and great leaders. But we can't make the same mistake of thinking just because teaching and teachers is the greatest leverage point that they can do it all. It's just too much. How many people here have really deep, caring relationships with 200 people? It's difficult, right? But in a lot of secondary schools, that 150, 200 students, that might be what a teacher has. To think that we're going to invest in training and professional development, they can get a lot better at creating fortified teaching and learning environments, but they can't do it alone, which means we're going to need a new human capital strategy. But how do we afford that and still invest in technology and still invest in professional development for our teachers and our leaders and all the other things that we know we need to do? Well, I'm here to suggest that we go to the same force for change that has led many of our great social change movements, which is young people, right? And that we think differently about national service. Just think about it. I work at an organization, we have 2,700 young adults. 85% of them are college graduates, 60% people of color, 60% low income, nearly 40% male. They're working in 250 of the lowest performing schools all across the country. They work 10, 12-hour days on a living stipend for a year or two. It's an incredible force for change. There were 600,000 applications, or 500,000 applications for AmeriCorps, and only 80,000 slots. There are lots of good organizations, but the challenge is, we have to really take them seriously. We can't just think of them as volunteers. We have to think of them as an army of practitioners who you can step back and say, how are we going to extend the school day? How are we going to make sure that every student is known by name? How are we going to teach the critical social and emotional skills? How are we going to provide the high-dose math and English tutoring for kids that are years behind? Right? And they have to be built into the actual design of the school. And I think if we do that, we can fuel the second bounce of the ball. Thank you.